Well, the UN World Food Program says the hunger crisis in Gaza has reached a new level of desperation and is condemning attacks on food aid sites by Israeli forces, which have killed hundreds. Michael Lynk is a law professor at Western and former UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Palestinian territory. Professor Lynk, thanks for taking time for us this morning. And if you can just start with helping us understand how these food sites are set up and why these attacks keep happening.
Desperation for food is a simple answer. During the ceasefire between the end of January and the beginning of March 2025, the United Nations was running 400 food depots across Gaza. It was bringing food to where the people were. And roughly about 650 trucks a day of humanitarian aid was entering into Gaza through that ceasefire period. From the beginning of March to the end of May, Israel imposed a total ban on any humanitarian aid, including food, getting into Gaza. And since the beginning of June, we now have humanitarian aid entering, but only being delivered by Israel to 4 sites instead of the 400. And instead of the 650 trucks that were entering into Gaza in January and February of 2025, only about an average of 160 trucks a day are entering. So this is the main reason why we see such a desperation for food, why we see so many Palestinians, around 800, have been killed largely by Israeli gunfire or gunfire by U.S. military contractors, or being crushed in trying to get food from these trucks. And that is why the World Food Program is saying that we've got an issue of starvation that may well be turning into famine in Gaza.
And so Israel says these food sites are necessary due to Hamas hijacking food aid. How much of a concern is that? What evidence have we seen of that?
Sure. Cindy McCain, who is the head of the United Nations World Food Program, had said earlier on this year there was no evidence that of any substantial diversion of food by Hamas for its own use of the aid that was coming in there. And that statement has been echoed by other senior UN humanitarian officials with regards to aid. So this seems to be less an issue with respect to trying to prevent Hamas gaining some of these supplies than it is a project which the UN is now saying appears almost to be a deliberate strategy by Israel of imposing starvation upon the 2 million people in Gaza.
And UN not the only body concerned this week. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand and I think 24 counterparts from mostly across Europe signing a joint statement. They're calling for an end to the war in Gaza. What kind of impact do you think that statement will have?
Well, we can only judge a statement by the actual effect that it's going to have. There have been statements issued before by various countries in the global north and by the United Nations calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. None of these have been heeded by Israel for any length of time. So the issue really is not the statement that's being made, as welcomed as it is. It's what meaningful steps will be taken by these countries if Israel does not obey, as it hasn't in the past. We've had numerous resolutions passed either by the UN Security Council or the UN General Assembly over the last 20 months, calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. And these have not held, and it's been primarily Israel's responsibility for their breach. This statement asks Israel to obey international humanitarian law. Well, we've seen, unfortunately, lots of evidence where war crimes or crimes against humanity have occurred during Israel's conduct of its military campaign in Gaza, and yet no meaningful steps have been taken beyond sanctioning a couple of Israeli cabinet ministers, and that has not proved to be effective in altering Israel's conduct.
Okay, we'll see if this statement has an impact. Very much appreciate your time this morning, Professor Lynk. That is Michael Lynk, law professor at Western and former UN Special Rapporteur on the Palestinian territory.